Wilhelm Kube was Commissioner General of occupied Belarus and approved numerous war crimes against Jews in the region. On September 22, 1943, he was assassinated in his Minsk apartment when a time bomb hidden in his mattress exploded. The device had been planted by Yelena Mazanik, a Belarusian partisan working as his maid. In retaliation, the SS executed over 1,000 men in Minsk. Despite Kube's role in Nazi crimes, Himmler reportedly called his death a blessing, as Kube's growing disagreements with the SS had already put him on track to booking himself a place in a concentration camp. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS and one of the main architects of the Holocaust, oversaw the concentration camps and Einsatzgruppen death squads across occupied Europe. By early 1945, as defeat became inevitable, his relationship with Hitler broke down. While still loyal in public, he began seeking peace talks with the Western Allies, hoping to continue the fight against the Soviets. His secret meetings with Swedish representatives in April 1945 were exposed to Hitler, who dismissed Himmler from all posts and ordered his arrest. After Hitler's death, Himmler approached Karl Dönitz, the new German leader, offering to serve as his deputy, but Dönitz expelled him from office. Disgraced and pursued, Himmler tried to flee under the name Heinrich Himmler. He was captured by British forces near Bremerwörde and taken for interrogation at Lüneburg. On May 23rd, when identified beyond doubt, he bit into a concealed cyanide capsule in his mouth during a medical inspection and died within minutes. Karl Dönitz was a Grand Admiral who became Hitler's successor and the final head of state of Nazi Germany after Hitler's death in April 1945. He led the U-boat campaign in the Battle of the Atlantic, which initially caused heavy Allied losses but eventually failed by 1943. After assuming power, Dönitz oversaw Germany's surrender, ordering General Alfred Jodl to sign the capitulation on May 7, 1945. Captured by the Allies, Dönitz was tried at Nuremberg and sentenced to 10 years. Released in 1956, he lived quietly in Aumühle, saying that he had acted out of duty to his nation. He died of a heart attack on Christmas Eve 1980. Josef Terboven served as Reichskommissar for Norway during the German occupation and was responsible for the Baldur massacre, where 288 Yugoslav prisoners died. In 1944, as Soviet forces advanced into northern Norway, he ordered a scorched earth campaign in Finnmark, forcing the evacuation of 50,000 civilians and leaving the region in ruins. As Germany's defeat neared, Terboven tried to turn Norway into a last defensive stronghold. After Hitler's death, his successor Karl Dönitz ordered him to cooperate in ending hostilities, but Terboven refused and was dismissed from his position. When Germany surrendered, he blew himself up inside a bunker at Skaugum by detonating 50 kilograms of dynamite. Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the German armed forces, was known for his blind obedience to Hitler, earning the contempt of his peers as a submissive yes-man. He signed and enforced some of the regime's most brutal military orders, including the Kommissar Order, mandating the execution of Soviet political officers, and the Night and Fog Decree that made political opponents disappear without trace. In the war's final weeks, Keitel urged futile counterattacks to save Berlin before joining Karl Dönitz's short-lived government after Hitler's death. He signed Germany's final surrender on May 8, 1945 at Karlshorst and was arrested days later by Allied forces. Keitel was convicted of war crimes and sentenced to death. His hanging on October 16, 1946 was botched, causing a prolonged and painful end that lasted over 20 minutes. Gregor Strasser was an early Nazi leader and head of the party's left-wing faction, which promoted a more anti-capitalist and revolutionary form of nationalism. His views and growing influence put him at odds with Hitler's leadership. In 1932, Chancellor Kurt von Schleicher offered Strasser the position of vice-chancellor, hoping to divide the Nazi party, but Hitler reacted by forcing Strasser out of all party roles. Strasser withdrew from politics and returned to work as a pharmacist. During the Night of the Long Knives in June 1934, he was arrested by the Gestapo and shot in the main artery from behind in his cell. Left to bleed to death on Reinhard Heydrich's orders, he died after nearly an hour. Josef Goebbels, Hitler's Minister of Propaganda, was one of the regime's most devoted followers, responsible for spreading Nazi ideology and fueling anti-Semitism. During the war, he called for total resistance and urged civilians to fight to the last man. In Hitler's final days, Goebbels stayed with him in the Führerbunker and briefly became Chancellor after Hitler's death. On May 1st, 1945, he sent a message to Soviet General Vasily Chuikov announcing Hitler's death and requesting a ceasefire, which was rejected. That evening, Goebbels and his wife Magda had their 6 children poisoned with cyanide after being sedated with morphine. Soon after, the couple went to the garden of the Reichschancellery, where they ended their own lives, either by cyanide or by gunshots. It's not entirely clear. Rudolf Höss was the commandant of Auschwitz and one of the key figures behind the mass murder of over 1 million people. As Nazi Germany collapsed, he fled under a false identity and hid with his family in Schleswig-Holstein, evading capture for nearly a year. In 1946, Nazi hunter Hans Alexander tracked him down, forcing his wife to reveal his hiding place after beating her son Klaus. When discovered, Höss tried to use a cyanide pill but was captured and handed over to Polish authorities. In April 1947, he was hanged beside the crematorium at Auschwitz. Martin Bormann was Hitler's private secretary, controlling access to Hitler and exerting immense power over domestic policy. He remained in the Führerbunker until the final days of the war, signing Hitler's last will and testament on April 29, 1945, and being named executor of his estate. After Hitler's death, Bormann attempted to escape Soviet-encircled Berlin with a small group. They fled through subway tunnels, crossed the Spree under fire, and made their way toward Lehrte station. Bormann was last seen with SS Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger. Hitler's driver Erich Kempka later reported he was killed during a Soviet tank blast on May 2, 1945. His remains were discovered near Lehrter Bahnhof decades later. Hermann Göring was head of the Luftwaffe, Hitler's designated successor and one of the most powerful figures in the Nazi regime. As the war collapsed, he believed that Hitler's decision to remain in Berlin rendered him incapable of leading. On 23rd of April 1945, Göring sent a telegram requesting permission to take over as Hitler's deputy, saying he would assume leadership if no response came by nightfall. Martin Bormann intercepted this message, convinced Hitler it was a coup attempt, and convinced him to rescind the succession order. Hitler accused Göring of treason and forced him to resign, after which the SS placed him under house arrest. When an Allied bombing raid destroyed his residence in Obersalzberg, Göring fled and surrendered to US forces, hoping to present himself as Germany's legitimate leader. Instead, he was imprisoned and later stood trial. Found guilty and sentenced to hang, Göring requested to be executed by firing squad as a soldier, but was denied. The night before his execution, he took his own life by biting into a cyanide capsule, probably hidden in his hair cream jar. How he obtained it remains unclear. Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy Führer from 1933 to 41, was a key figure in the Nazi hierarchy until his bizarre solo flight to Scotland in 1941, hoping to negotiate peace with Britain. He was captured and interrogated for a year, though much of what he revealed remains classified. After the war, Hess was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. From 1966 onward, he was the only inmate in Berlin's Spandau prison watched constantly. On August 17, 1987, at age 93, he was found dead in a small garden hut within the prison, having hanged himself with an electrical cord. Some relatives and his lawyer have claimed he was taken out by MI6, arguing he was too frail to do it himself. Reinhard Heydrich, one of the most feared figures in Nazi Germany, was Himmler's deputy and head of the Reichssecurity Main Office, overseeing the Gestapo, Kripo and Sicherheitsdienst. As deputy Reich Protector of Bohemia and Moravia, he ruled the Czech lands with brutality and directed the Einsatzgruppen death squads responsible for the deaths of millions. On May 27, 1942, he was attacked in Prague by Czech and Slovak agents during Operation Anthropoid, organized by the Czechoslovak government in exile and trained by the British. Wounded by an explosion and shrapnel, Heydrich developed a fatal infection and died of sepsis on June 4, 1942, aged 38. Ernst Kaltenbrunner succeeded Heydrich as head of the Reich Security Main Office until the end of the war. Under his command, the Holocaust intensified as he directed the machinery of mass murder across occupied Europe. In April 1945, Himmler appointed him commander of German forces in southern Europe, but the Reich was collapsing and he fled to Austria. In May, American troops captured him hiding in a mountain cabin near Altausee. As the highest-ranking SS officer tried at Nuremberg, Kaltenbrunner claimed he only handled intelligence work and that Himmler was responsible for the crimes. The tribunal rejected his defense. He was hanged in October 1946. Heinrich Müller was chief of the Gestapo and reported directly to Reinhard Heydrich. He was last confirmed seen in Hitler's bunker on May 1, 1945, as others prepared to flee Berlin, after which he vanished without a trace. His disappearance became one of the great post-war mysteries. Some claimed he was killed during the fall of Berlin, others that he was captured by the Soviets or escaped to South America. Reports surfaced over the years suggesting his body had been found in various locations, including near the Reich Chancellery or buried in a Berlin mass grave, but none were conclusively proven. To this day, his fate remains unresolved, making him the highest-ranking Nazi never confirmed dead or captured. Joachim von Ribbentrop, Hitler's foreign minister, negotiated a Pact of Steel with Italy and the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with the Soviet Union, which secured Germany's eastern flank before the invasion of Poland. After Hitler's death, he sought a role in Dönitz's government but was rejected and went into hiding in Hamburg. Captured in June 1945, he was found carrying a letter addressed to Churchill defending Hitler and blaming Britain for the rise of Bolshevism. At Nuremberg, Ribbentrop claimed to have been misled by Hitler's repeated claims of wanting peace, but the tribunal held him accountable. On October 16, 1946, he was the first to be executed by hanging. The drop was miscalculated and he died slowly by strangulation over 14 minutes. Ernst Röhm, a close friend of Hitler and head of the Sturmabteilung, was instrumental in Hitler's rise to power but later became a liability. He advocated for a second revolution that would nationalize land and industry and sought to replace the regular army with his SA forces, alarming the military and Hitler's industrial supporters. Under mounting pressure from President Hindenburg and the army, Hitler authorized a purge to eliminate Röhm and his faction. Fabricated evidence prepared by Himmler and Heydrich alleged that Röhm had accepted millions from France to overthrow Hitler. On June 30th, 1934, during the Night of the Long Knives, Röhm and other SA leaders were arrested. Initially spared due to his past loyalty, Röhm was later given a pistol in his cell at Stadelheim prison and told he had 10 minutes to take his own life. When he refused, declaring that Hitler should do it himself, SS officers Theodor Eicke and Michael Lippert entered his cell and shot him multiple times. Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations for the German Armed Forces High Command, was one of Hitler's most loyal military officers. Promoted to Colonel General in 1944, he remained steadfast in his service even after being injured during the failed July 20th plot against Hitler. As Germany collapsed, Jodl signed the unconditional surrender on May 7th in Reims, formally ending the war in Europe, and briefly succeeded Keitel as army chief after his arrest. Captured by British troops, he was tried at Nuremberg, where he insisted he had only followed orders, bound by duty. Jodl was hanged in October 1946. His final words were, "I salute you, my eternal Germany." Adolf Hitler, dictator of Nazi Germany, spent his final months in the Führerbunker under the Reich Chancellery as his empire collapsed. By April 1945, Soviet forces had encircled Berlin, while the Western Allies advanced from the west. Yet Hitler refused to surrender, convinced that counterattacks could still turn the tide. On April 20th, he made his last appearance in public, presenting medals to Hitler Youth members defending Berlin before retreating underground. As the Soviets entered the city, he married Eva Braun on April 29th, as Berlin was hit by artillery strikes. Upon learning of Mussolini's execution the next day, he resolved not to be captured alive. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler and Braun took their lives. Hitler by gunshot to the head, Braun by cyanide poisoning. Despite theories suggesting his escape, overwhelming evidence confirms Hitler died in Berlin. Wilhelm Canaris was head of the military intelligence service Abwehr. He supported Hitler at first, but grew disillusioned with the regime. As Germany plunged deeper into war, he secretly turned against Hitler, using his intelligence position to undermine Nazi operations and pass information to the Allies. In 1940, he sabotaged Hitler's plan to invade Gibraltar by advising Franco against cooperation, ensuring Spain's neutrality. His covert resistance eventually drew suspicion. Pressured by Himmler, Hitler dismissed him in February 1944 and dissolved the Abwehr. After the July plot failed, Canaris was implicated as a key instigator, arrested and brutally interrogated by the Gestapo. In February 1945, he was transferred to Flossenbürg concentration camp, where he was stripped naked and executed by hanging on April 9, 1945. According to SS commander Jürgen Stroop, he was hanged on a butcher's hook. Robert Ley was the head of the German Labor Front, which replaced all independent trade unions and brought the German workforce under Nazi control. He oversaw labor programs like Strength Through Joy and promoted projects such as the Volkswagen to serve the regime's propaganda and rearmament goals. Fiercely loyal to Hitler even in defeat, Ley was captured by American forces near the Austrian border, still proclaiming his devotion to the Führer. Before he could be tried, he hanged himself in his cell in October 1945. Albert Speer was Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production. As Germany faced collapse, Speer recognized the war was lost, but continued production efforts in hopes of negotiating better surrender terms. He opposed Hitler's Nero decree, which ordered the destruction of German infrastructure and persuaded military leaders to ignore it. On April 22nd, he made his final visit to the Führerbunker before fleeing Berlin. After Hitler's death, Speer briefly served in Karl Dönitz's short-lived government before being arrested by the British in May. At his trial, he claimed ignorance of Nazi extermination plans and positioned himself as a repentant technocrat. He got a 20-year sentence. Released in 1966, he reinvented himself through books and interviews as the so-called good Nazi, though later evidence suggested he had been more complicit than he admitted. Speer died of a stroke in London in 1981. Baldur von Schirach was the leader of the Hitler Youth and governor of Vienna. As the Red Army closed in, he fled west. He eventually surrendered to US forces and was arrested. At Nuremberg, he denounced Hitler, claiming he had been misled and expressing remorse for his role in promoting anti-Semitism, which he blamed on his reading of Henry Ford's The International Jew. Schirach maintained that the Hitler Youth were innocent of war crimes. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, released in 1966, and lived quietly until his death from coronary thrombosis in 1974. Wilhelm Frick was Minister of the Interior and later Protector of Bohemia and Moravia, responsible for the Nuremberg laws and other racial policies. After losing influence to Himmler, he served as Hitler's representative in the Czech lands. Arrested at the end of the war, Frick was tried at Nuremberg and later refused to testify on his own behalf. His hanging was botched. He struck his head on the trapdoor, and strangulation and convulsions lasted 12 minutes before he died. Arthur Seyss-Inquart, Reich Commissioner for the occupied Netherlands, oversaw mass deportations and the forced labor of Dutch civilians. His administration left the country devastated and starving by the end of the war. In April 1945, during the Dutch hunger winter, he reluctantly agreed to Allied food drops, but still refused to surrender. After Hitler's death, he briefly was foreign minister. Captured by the British in Hamburg, he was tried and hanged in October 1946. Fritz Sauckel was slave labor chief and responsible for the forced labor of over 5 million people across occupied Europe. After Germany's surrender, he attempted to destroy evidence and evade capture, moving between safe houses in southern Germany, but was arrested by US forces. At his trial, Sauckel claimed he had merely followed orders and treated laborers fairly, but overwhelming evidence proved his direct responsibility for exploitation and abuse. He was executed by hanging. Hans Frank was Hitler's personal legal advisor and Governor-General of occupied Poland. He oversaw brutal repression and was directly involved in mass murder. Captured by American forces in Bavaria, he attempted to take his life twice. During his trial, he converted to Roman Catholicism. His voluntarily surrendered diaries provided damning evidence of his crimes. He was also executed by hanging. Franz Xaver Schwarz was the Nazi Party's Reich treasurer, managing finances, and one of the highest-ranking members of the SS. After Germany's defeat, he was arrested by the Americans and held at Camp Ashcan before being transferred to another camp near Regensburg. He died there in 1947 from recurring stomach problems at the age of 72.